The night her world ended began with snowflakes falling like silent prayers against the cabin window. 6-year-old Alara pressed her small palm against the cold glass, watching the white flakes drift down from a moonless sky. Behind her, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the wooden walls. Her mother hummed softly while braiding her hair, fingers gentle and warm against her scalp. Her father sat at the table, cleaning his tracking equipment with the methodical precision of a man who had spent 30 years reading the secrets of the forest. It was a perfect moment, the last perfect moment she would ever know. The first sign of danger came not as sound, but as silence. The winter birds that had been calling in the trees went quiet. The wind that had been whispering through the pines held its breath. Even the fire seemed to dim, as if the flames themselves sensed what was coming. Aldrich raised his head, his hand stilled on the compass he was polishing. 20 years of service as the territory's chief tracker had taught him to read the language of stillness, and what he heard now made the color drain from his weathered face. Serafina. His voice was calm, but Alara heard something beneath it that she had never heard before. Fear. Take our daughter. The back room. Now. Her mother's fingers tightened in Alara's hair for just a moment. Then she was moving, pulling Alara from the window, crossing the cabin in 3 swift strides. The back room was small, barely larger than a closet, with a heavy oak wardrobe against one wall. Inside, Little Dove. Her mother opened the wardrobe door, pushing aside the hanging clothes to reveal the empty space behind. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, you must not make a sound. Do you understand? Not a single sound. Alara's eyes were wide, her heart hammering against her small chest. Mama, what is happening? Promise me, Alara. Serafina's hands cupped her daughter's face, and her eyes held a desperate intensity that burned itself into Alara's memory forever. Promise me you will stay silent. I promise, Mama. The words were barely out of her mouth before the front door exploded inward. From her hiding place in the wardrobe, Alara watched through the crack between the doors. She watched as 5 figures in dark leather entered the cabin, their movements coordinated with military precision. She watched as her father drew his hunting knife and stood to face them, placing himself between the intruders and the back room where his family hid. She saw the symbol on their armor, a silver serpent coiled around a black moon. She did not know what it meant then. She would learn. She would never forget. Aldrich fought like a man possessed. For all his years of peaceful tracking work, he had been trained as a warrior in his youth, and those skills came flooding back as he faced the attackers. He took down 2 of them before they overwhelmed him, his blade finding throats and hearts with the same precision he used to find deer trails and hidden springs. But 5 against 1 was impossible odds, even for a man fighting for his family. Alara watched her father fall. She watched the light leave his eyes as a blade pierced his chest. She watched his hand reach out toward the back room, toward her, as if he could protect her even in death. She opened her mouth to scream, and nothing came out. Her mother burst from the back room then, armed with nothing but a fireplace poker and a mother's desperate fury. Serafina lasted longer than anyone might have expected, her rage lending her strength beyond her size. But in the end, she too fell, her blood spreading across the wooden floor to mingle with her husband's. The intruders searched the cabin. They overturned furniture, scattered papers, took anything of value. One of them stopped at the wardrobe, his hand reaching for the door. "Leave it." The voice came from outside. "We have what we came for. The tracker is dead. His secrets die with him." The man's hand dropped. A moment later, they were gone, leaving only bodies and blood, and a 6-year-old girl who would not speak again for 17 years. Alara stayed in that wardrobe until dawn. She stayed while the fire burned down to embers. She stayed while the cold crept in through the broken door. She stayed while her parents' bodies grew still and cold in the room beyond. She had promised to stay silent. She kept that promise. When the morning light finally gave her courage to emerge, she walked past her parents' bodies without looking at them. She walked out into the snow, her feet bare, her nightgown stained with the blood she had crawled through. She walked until a patrol found her 3 miles from the cabin, a frozen ghost of a child who would not speak, could not speak, had forgotten how to speak. The healers said it was trauma, the mind protecting itself from pain too great to process. They said her voice might return in time, with patience and care. They were wrong. 17 years had passed and Alara had not spoken a single word. She had learned that silence was safer. Silence meant invisibility, and invisibility meant survival. Now, at 23 years old, she scrubbed the stone floors of Alpha Victor's great hall with the practiced efficiency of someone who had perfected the art of being overlooked. Her silver-white hair was tied back in a simple braid. Her servant's clothes were deliberately drab, designed to blend into the background. Her movements were quiet, economical, never drawing attention. She had been a servant in the Shadowmere Pack for 17 years, ever since the patrol had brought her to the territory and no one had come to claim her. The pack had taken her in out of obligation rather than kindness. A mute orphan was hardly a prize, but even the cruelest pack had standards about leaving children to die. Her grandmother had found her 3 months after the attack. Lena was Seraphina's mother, an elderly woman who lived in a remote cottage at the edge of Shadowmere territory. She had petitioned Alpha Victor for custody of her granddaughter, and he had granted it with the indifference of a man who had more important matters to consider. For 15 years, Alara had lived with her grandmother. Lena had taught her to read and write, to draw, to communicate without words. She had taught her the names of plants and their uses. She had taught her something else, too, something secret. "You must hide what you are, little dove." Lena's voice echoed in Alara's memory as she scrubbed the floor. "You are an Omega. If they discover this, they will use you, force you into a political mating, make you a pawn in their games. This mixture of herbs will mask your scent. Use it every day. Stay hidden. Stay safe." Alara had followed her grandmother's instructions faithfully. When Lena died 2 years ago, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 87, Alara had returned to service in the pack house. She had no other options. A mute servant had no marriage prospects, no career possibilities, no future beyond scrubbing floors and carrying firewood and trying desperately to remain invisible. It was a small life, a quiet life, a safe life. But tonight, that life was about to change forever. The great hall of Shadowmere Pack was an imposing space of dark stone and heavy timber. Massive fireplaces dominated each end, their flames casting shifting shadows across tapestries that depicted the pack's bloody history. The high ceiling was lost in darkness, and the windows were narrow slits that let in little light even during the day. Most of the servants had been dismissed for the evening. Only Alara remained, working in the shadows near the back of the hall, invisible as always. She had learned long ago that being overlooked could be an advantage. People said things in front of servants that they would never say in front of equals. And Alara, silent and seemingly simple, heard everything. Alpha Victor stood near the main fireplace, his imposing figure silhouetted against the flames. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and powerful, with steel-gray hair and eyes that held the cold calculation of a predator. At 55 years old, he ruled Shadowmere with an iron fist and a ruthless efficiency that had made his territory one of the most feared in the Northern Territories. He was not alone. The man who stood with him was a stranger to Alara, though something about him made her skin crawl with instinctive unease. He was tall and lean, with the whipcord build of a fighter rather than a brawler. A scar ran across his jaw from ear to chin, white against tanned skin. His eyes were flat and empty, the eyes of a man who had killed so many times that death no longer held meaning. Draven the Shadow. Alara had heard the name whispered in dark corners. A mercenary leader, an assassin, a man who sold death to the highest bidder, the Peace Festival. Victor's voice was low, but it carried easily in the empty hall. Alara kept her head down, kept scrubbing, kept her breathing slow and even. 3 weeks. That is when we strike. The listening king always brings minimal guard to the festival. Draven's voice was rougher, colder. His weakness is trust. He believes in peace. He believes his neighbors share that belief. Alpha King Kale of the Northern White Peaks. Alara's brush stilled for just a moment before she caught herself and resumed scrubbing. Everyone in the territories knew of Kyle. They called him the Listening King because he was said to hear what others missed. They said he could read truth in silence better than most read words on a page. They said his territory prospered because he actually listened to his people, even the quietest voices. They said he was fair, just, honorable, everything Victor was not. "How many wolves?" Victor asked. 50, Draven replied. "Hand-picked, veterans of a dozen campaigns. We will hit them at the height of the celebration, when the wine is flowing and reflexes are slow. 3 squads, 20 from the front to create chaos, 15 from the eastern flank, 15 more to cut off retreat through the western pass." Alara's mind was racing even as her hands continued their mechanical work. She was mapping the attack in her head, visualizing the festival grounds she had heard described, plotting the positions Draven was describing. Her father had been a tracker. He had taught her to think in terms of terrain and movement, to read a landscape the way others read books. "And the secondary targets?" Victor asked. "The Beta and Gamma will be eliminated in the initial assault." Draven's voice held no emotion, as if he were discussing the weather rather than murder. "Without the command structure, his wolves will scatter. The king will be isolated and vulnerable." Victor nodded slowly. "And what of the mercenary leader Marcus the Blade? I thought he was your competition in this region." Draven's laugh was cold as winter ice. "Marcus is useful cover. Everyone knows he has a grudge against the Northern Alliance. When this is done, evidence will point to him. Let the other territories chase a ghost while we consolidate power." Alara felt ice spreading through her veins. This was not just assassination. This was a carefully planned operation to destabilize the entire northern territories. With Kyle dead and his command structure eliminated, chaos would follow, and Victor, the neighboring Alpha offering stability, would be perfectly positioned to sweep in and claim the pieces. "There is something else you should know," Victor said, his voice dropping even lower. "Something that might interest you personally." Draven tilted his head, waiting. "Kyle carries guilt from 10 years ago. He made a decision that led to the deaths of 200 of his wolves, including his own sister. A young girl, mute from birth. He has never recovered. My sources say he refuses to take a mate, refuses to get close to anyone. He believes anyone who cares for him is doomed." Victor's smile was cruel. "A broken king is easier to kill than a whole one. His guilt has made him cautious, but it has also made him isolated. He will have fewer wolves around him who would die to protect him, fewer wolves who love him enough to see threats he cannot." Draven nodded slowly. "Useful information. I will factor it into the plan." The conversation continued, but Alara had heard enough. Her hands were trembling now, and she had to grip the brush harder to keep them steady. She knew what she needed to know. An assassination at the Peace Festival. 3 weeks. 50 wolves. A king who would die because he trusted in peace. She needed to warn someone. But who? The answer to that question kept her awake through the long hours of the night. She sat in her tiny room in the servants' quarters, staring at the leather-bound journal that held her most precious drawings. Her mother had given her this journal the year before she died. Over the past 17 years, Alara had filled its pages with images of everything she had witnessed. Plants, animals, people, places. The journal was her voice, her way of processing a world she could not speak to. Now it might be her weapon. She could try to tell someone in the pack, but who would believe a mute servant over their alpha? She could write down what she had heard, but Victor would simply deny it, and then she would disappear. She had seen servants who knew too much vanish before. Quick, quiet, final. She could try to reach King Kale directly, but she was a nobody. A mute servant from an enemy territory. She would be arrested as a spy before she ever got close to him. Unless she found another way. The northern White Peaks bordered Shadowmere territory to the north. If she could reach the border, could leave warnings where Kale's patrols would find them, not words. They might not understand her writing, might dismiss it as a prank, but drawings, detailed, specific drawings that showed exactly what was planned. It was insane. It was suicidal. If she was caught outside the packlands at night, if rogues found her, if Victor's wolves spotted her, she would be killed without question. But if she did nothing, a good king would die. And how many others would suffer under Victor's expanded rule? Elara looked at the journal in her hands. She thought of her father, who had died protecting his family. She thought of her mother, who had given her life trying to fight the intruders. They had not hidden. They had not stayed silent when it mattered. Perhaps it was time for their daughter to find her courage, too. The first night, Elara left at midnight. She had spent the day memorizing the patrol schedules, a task made easier by years of being invisible. Guards talked freely in front of servants. They discussed their routes, their timing, their complaints about the cold. Elara listened and remembered everything. The journey to the border would take 3 hours on foot through winter forest and darkness. She wore dark clothes and wrapped rags around her feet to muffle her footsteps on the snow. Her grandmother's herb pouch hung at her belt, its contents keeping her omega scent masked. A sharpened stick served as her drawing tool. The forest at night was terrifying. Every sound made her freeze. Every shadow held threats. But Elara had grown up in these woods. Her father had taught her to move through the wild places, had shown her how to read the forest's moods and navigate its dangers. She called on those lessons now, moving through the darkness with careful precision. When she reached the border, marked by ancient stones carved with territorial symbols, she found a clearing where patrol paths intersected. Fresh wolf prints in the snow told her that Kale's guards passed through here regularly. She knelt in the snow and began to draw. The first warning was tactical, a map of the festival grounds with clear markings of danger. She drew the main pavilion, the surrounding areas, the specific points Draven had mentioned. She marked ambush positions with symbols any trained warrior would recognize. Attack points, kill zones, escape routes. Her fingers went numb as she worked, the cold biting through her thin gloves. Her breath formed clouds in the frozen air, but she kept drawing, pouring everything she remembered into the snow before her. When she finished, she stepped back to examine her work. Even in the pale moonlight, the drawing was clear. Would it be enough? Would Kale's wolves find it? Would they understand? She had to trust that the listening king's reputation was deserved, that he would hear this silent warning. She made the journey back to Shadowmere, slipping into her room just as dawn began to break. Her body ached, her fingers were raw, but she had done it. The first warning was placed. 6 more nights to go. The second night, she drew the number 50 in a way that could not be misunderstood. 50 wolf figures arranged in the 3 attack formations Draven had described. The number was critical. Kael needed to know the scope of the threat. But this night brought something else. A memory surfacing as she worked. Her father's voice, patient and warm, teaching a small girl how to move through the forest. Your feet must be light as falling leaves, little one. Your breath must be soft as the wind. The forest will hide you if you let it. She had almost forgotten his voice. 17 years of silence had worn away so many memories. But here, in the darkness, doing something he would have been proud of, she could almost hear him again. The third night was the most dangerous. She needed to draw Draven's face. She spent the day watching him, memorizing every detail while appearing to focus on her work. The scar across his jaw, the empty eyes, the way he held himself, coiled and ready for violence. Her artist's eye captured everything, storing it for later. That night, she created the most detailed portrait she had ever drawn. Draven's face emerged from the snow with startling clarity. Beneath it, she drew the symbols that marked him as a known mercenary leader. Wanted posters in Shadowmere bore similar markings. Any intelligence officer in Kale's guard would recognize him. But drawing him was not enough. She added something else, a second symbol beneath his portrait, the insignia of a Delta officer in the Northern White Peaks military structure. She had heard Victor mention something earlier that day, a casual comment that had frozen her blood. The beauty of using Draven, he had told his advisor, is that he knows exactly how Kale thinks. He served under him for 5 years. He was there when Kale's sister died. Draven was not just a mercenary, he was a traitor, a former officer who had served in Kale's own guard. This knowledge changed everything. A random assassin was dangerous. A man who knew Kale's tactics, his habits, his weaknesses, that was lethal. She had to warn Cale not just about the attack, but about who was leading it. The fourth night brought revelation. Before leaving for the border, Elara opened her mother's journal to review her drawings. As she flipped through the pages, something caught her eye. A small piece of paper, folded and tucked between the pages near the back. She had never noticed it before. Her grandmother's handwriting filled the paper, cramped and hurried, as if written in secret haste. My darling Elara, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you have found yourself in danger great enough to return to this journal for guidance. There is something I never told you. A secret passed through our family's women for generations. We are soul artists. Elara's hands trembled as she read on. The gift manifests in times of great need, when we create not just images but reality. Our drawings can become real if our intention is pure and our need is great. I have kept this secret to protect you. The gift is rare, so rare that the world believes it extinct. If Victor or anyone else knew what you could become, they would use you or destroy you. I have seen your future, Elara. I drew it 30 years before you were born. A clearing in the snow, 30 white wolves, a king with eyes like winter ice. You will save him, and in doing so, you will find your voice again. Trust the gift, trust yourself, and know that your mother and I will always love you, even from beyond the veil. Your grandmother, Lena. Elara stared at the letter for a long time. Soul artist. She had heard the term in old stories, legends of artists whose creations could become real, but those were fairy tales, myths. No one had seen a true soul artist in 200 years, yet her grandmother had known, had seen the future, had kept this secret for decades. Elara looked at her hands, scarred from years of servant work. These hands had drawn thousands of images. Had any of them ever shown signs of this impossible gift? She thought of the warnings she had been drawing in the snow. Sometimes, when she finished, the lines seemed to shimmer slightly in the moonlight. She had dismissed it as a trick of the light, her tired eyes playing games. But what if it was something more? There was only one way to find out. That night, when she reached the border and began to draw, she tried something different. Instead of simply recording information, she focused on intention. She thought about Kyle, about saving his life, about the desperate need to protect an innocent king from assassination. She poured emotion into every line, and the lines began to glow, faint at first, barely visible, but as she watched, the drawing pulsed with soft silver light. The tactical symbols she had created seemed to lift slightly from the snow, gaining dimension, becoming almost real. Elara gasped and pulled her hand back. The glow faded, and the drawing returned to normal. But she had seen it. She had felt it. Her grandmother had been right. The gift was real. The fifth night, she pushed further. The drawings glowed brighter, held their luminescence longer. She was learning to control the gift, to feed it with intention and emotion. Each warning she created was not just a message, but a piece of her soul pressed into the snow. The sixth night, she drew Victor's symbol connected to the rogues. The silver serpent coiled around the black moon, the same symbol she had seen on the armor of the men who killed her parents. For the first time, she drew a line between Shadowmere and her family's murder. She did not know exactly what it meant, but she knew there was a connection. Victor, or someone working for him, had ordered her parents' deaths 17 years ago. This was no longer just about saving a king. This was personal. The seventh night, she drew everything else she had gathered: escape routes, secondary meeting points, the timing of the attack. Every detail Draven and Victor had discussed. She created a complete intelligence briefing in images, leaving nothing out. But she also drew something else. A figure standing in the midst of battle, arms raised, light streaming from her hands. It was herself, though she did not fully understand the image. It came from somewhere deeper than conscious thought, rising up through her gift like a prophecy demanding to be recorded. Her grandmother had seen her future. Perhaps Elara was seeing it too. When she returned to her room that night, exhausted beyond measure, she found herself looking at the drawings her grandmother had left in the journal. They were abstract, strange, images that had never made sense. Now they did. There was the clearing in the snow, drawn 30 years before Alara had ever knelt in it. There were the 30 white wolves, their forms captured with perfect accuracy. And there, in the center of the formation, was a king with platinum hair and eyes like chips of ice. Kael, her grandmother, had seen him, had known that Alara would meet him. What else had Lena seen? What other futures were hidden in these cryptic drawings? Alara was too tired to search further that night, but she tucked the journal under her pillow and fell into restless sleep, her dreams filled with glowing lines and silver wolves and a voice she had not heard in 17 years, her own voice, speaking words she could not remember when she woke. The 8th day dawned cold and clear. Alara knew she needed to create one final drawing, the most important one. She would draw Kael himself, surrounded by a protective shield with symbols of warning arranged around him, a visual message that said, "This man is the target. Protect him. Everything else I have shown you leads to his death." It was risky going out so soon after the previous night. Her body was exhausted, her fingers raw and bleeding from the cold and the rough bark she used for drawing tools. But there were only 2 weeks left until the festival. Time was running out. She left before dawn, taking advantage of the early morning darkness. The forest was quiet, the night creatures beginning to settle as the day hunters started to stir. She moved through the familiar paths with practiced ease, her body operating on muscle memory, while her mind planned the drawing ahead. When she reached the clearing, she found it pristine. Fresh snow had fallen during the night, covering her previous drawings in a clean white canvas. That was fine. Each drawing was meant to be found by the patrols. If they had been covered, it meant the earlier messages had been collected. Someone was listening. She knelt in her usual spot, took out her sharpened stick, and began to create. She had never seen Kael in person, but his description was well known throughout the territories. Tall, powerfully built, platinum blonde hair worn long in the old style, eyes the color of winter ice, pale blue and piercing. She drew him as she imagined him, standing strong and proud, a king in the prime of his power. Around him, she drew a circle, a shield, a barrier of protection. She filled it with symbols of warning, of danger, of the attack that was coming. She poured every ounce of her gift into the drawing, feeling the familiar pulse of silver light begin to emanate from the lines. This was more than a message. This was a prayer made visible. A desperate plea for salvation sent across the border in the only language she knew how to speak. Please, please understand. Please be safe. She was so focused on the drawing, so absorbed in getting every detail perfect, that she did not hear the footsteps in the snow. She did not sense the presence closing in around her. She did not realize she was no longer alone until the absolute silence made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Complete silence. Not a bird, not a rustle of wind, not a single sound in the frozen forest, the silence of predators holding perfectly still. Alara's hand froze mid-stroke. Her heart thundered in her chest, the sound seeming impossibly loud in the quiet. Slowly, carefully, she turned her head and saw them. 30 white wolves arranged in a perfect semicircle behind her. They were massive, clearly elite warriors, their white and silver fur gleaming in the pale dawn light. They stood in military formation, utterly motionless, not a single growl or movement to betray their presence. The Silent Guard, Kael's legendary elite unit, warriors said to move like ghosts and strike like lightning, and in the center of their formation, one wolf that dwarfed all the others. Pure white, enormous, radiating power and authority. His eyes were the exact shade of ice blue she had just been drawing, those eyes fixed on her with an intensity that stole her breath. Alara's first instinct was to run. But where? She was surrounded, outnumbered, completely outmatched. Even at her fastest, she would never outrun wolves, especially not these wolves. So instead, she did something that probably seemed insane. She stood slowly, keeping her hands visible. She lifted her chin, met those ice-blue eyes directly, and did not look away. If she was going to die, she would die with dignity. She would die knowing she had tried to save an innocent king from assassination. She would die standing, not cowering. The great white wolf took a step forward, then another. The other wolves held their positions, but their leader approached until he was less than 10 feet away, close enough that Alara could see the individual hairs of his magnificent coat, the ancient scars that marked his muzzle, the terrible intelligence in his gaze. Then he shifted. It was fluid, seamless, beautiful. One moment, a massive white wolf. The next, a man who matched Alara's drawing so perfectly it made her dizzy. Tall, over 6.5 feet. Platinum blonde hair falling past his shoulders, braided at the temples in the old warrior style. Ice-blue eyes that seemed to see straight through her to the secrets she kept hidden. His body was marked with scars that spoke of battles survived, wounds that would have killed lesser men. He wore simple traveling clothes, but he carried himself like a king. Because he was. This was Kale, the listening king, the man she had been trying to save. He was staring at her like she was something impossible, something precious, something that could not exist. You. His voice was deep and rough, carrying a weight of emotion she did not understand. You are the artist. It was not a question. He had found her drawings. He had understood them. And somehow, impossibly, he had found her. Alara could not respond. She could not speak. All she could do was stand there, her throat tight with 17 years of silence, and hope her eyes said what her voice could not. Yes. Yes, I am the one. Please believe me. Please. Kale's gaze moved from her face to the drawing in the snow. She watched him take in the image of himself surrounded by a protective shield. Then his eyes moved to the area around the clearing, where traces of her previous drawings were still visible beneath the fresh snow. The maps, the tactical positions, the portrait of Draven with his old insignia marked below. When his eyes returned to her, something had changed in them. Understanding and fury, not at her, at what she had revealed. You cannot speak. It was another statement, not a question. Something in her posture, her silence, the desperate intensity of her expression had told him everything. Alara shook her head. But you can hear me. She nodded. Kale took another step closer. His voice dropped, becoming almost gentle despite its roughness. These drawings. You have been coming here every night for a week. Alone, in the dark, risking everything to warn me about an assassination attempt. Another nod. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break her ribs. You are from Shadowmere Pack. This time the nod came harder. Yes, she was from the enemy's territory. Yes, she was a servant of the man who wanted him dead. Yes, she had crossed the border illegally 7 times. Yes, she had committed treason against her own pack. If Victor discovers what you have done. Kale's jaw tightened, and something dangerous flickered in his eyes. He will kill you. Alara made a slashing gesture across her throat. Yes, exactly. For a long moment, Kale simply looked at her. Then something changed in his expression. Something shifted. The cold calculation of a king assessing a threat melted away, replaced by something warmer, something wondering. Why? He asked quietly. Why risk everything for a stranger? For a king you have never met? Alara hesitated. Then she knelt back down in the snow, picked up her drawing stick, and began to sketch. Not tactical information this time. Something simpler. She drew a pair of wolves lying still. Dead. A small figure huddled nearby, mouth open in a silent scream. Above them, the Shadowmere symbol, the serpent and moon. Kale watched her draw. When she finished, his face had gone pale. They killed your family. Alara nodded. Then she added more to the drawing. Lines connecting the dead wolves to other figures. A man in armor with Victor's stance. The number 17. 17 years ago, Kale breathed. Victor had your family killed 17 years ago. Another nod. Then she drew herself as she was now, standing, drawing, warning. She tapped the images in sequence. They killed my family, but I will not let them kill anyone else. The listening king was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice held a depth of emotion that made Alara's chest ache. "You have spent 17 years in the territory of the man who murdered your parents. You have stayed silent, stayed invisible, stayed safe. And now you risk everything to save my life. A stranger, a king who has never done anything for you." He stepped closer still, close enough to touch. "You are either the bravest person I have ever met, or the most foolish." Alara met his eyes and shrugged slightly, a gesture that said, "Perhaps both." Something happened then, something she had heard of in stories but never experienced. The air between them shifted, charged, electric. The world seemed to narrow until there was only him, only those ice-blue eyes, only the impossible feeling of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in 17 years. The mate bond. Alara felt it slam into her like a physical force. Warmth, safety, home, belonging. Every lonely year suddenly filled, every silent scream finally heard, every broken piece of her soul beginning to mend. She saw the moment Cale felt it too. His eyes widened, his breath caught. He moved without thinking, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides, reaching for her hand. The moment their skin touched, the world exploded. The mate bond was one thing. This was something else entirely. Alara's drawings in the snow began to glow. Not just glow, they began to rise. The lines she had drawn were lifting from the snow, becoming 3-dimensional shapes of pure silver light. The map she had created was now a floating, rotating model. The portrait of Draven looked almost alive, every detail crystal clear. And the protective shield she had drawn around Cale's image was real now, a barrier of shimmering silver energy, solid as steel, beautiful as moonlight. The 30 wolves behind them shifted nervously, but held formation. Their discipline was incredible. Cale himself was staring at the manifestations with awe. "Moon goddess," he breathed, "you are a soul artist." Alara looked from her glowing creations to Kael's face, shock written across her features. She had suspected. After reading her grandmother's letter, she had begun to believe. But this was beyond anything she had imagined. "Soul artists can create reality from art," Kael said, his voice gentle despite the wonder in his eyes. "It is the rarest gift the goddess grants. I thought they were extinct. The last known soul artist died 200 years ago." He squeezed her hand carefully, and the drawings pulsed brighter. "Your gift awakened because of the mate bond, because you were trying to protect me with everything you had. Your art became real because your intention was pure." Alara's mind was reeling. Soul artist, mate bond. Everything was happening too fast, too much. But Kael's hand in hers was an anchor, steady, solid, safe. And then she saw it. Behind Kael, among the floating manifestations of her drawings, something new was forming. An image she had not consciously created. A memory rising from her grandmother's journal, manifesting through her awakened gift. A woman with silver-white hair, old and kind, looking at Alara with love that transcended death. Grandmother Lena, appearing in light one final time to confirm what Alara had read, to say goodbye, to say, "I knew this day would come. I am proud of you." The image faded, but its message remained. Alara was exactly where she was supposed to be, exactly where her grandmother had seen her 30 years ago, standing in a clearing with 30 white wolves and a king with eyes like winter ice. Her destiny had finally begun. "What is your name?" Kael asked softly. She could not tell him, could not speak, but she raised her hand and traced letters in the air, each one glowing faintly with silver light. E-L-A-R-A, Elara. Kael repeated her name like it was something precious, like it was a prayer. "I am Kael, and you are my mate, my soul artist mate, who has been risking her life every night to save mine." He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. The gesture sent warmth flooding through every part of her being. "I will not let anything happen to you. You are under my protection now, mine to guard, mine to cherish, mine to keep safe." One of the wolves behind him, a large silver female, shifted to human form. She was tall, powerfully built, with silver-white hair braided back from a striking face lined with the wisdom of decades. "Alpha." Frost's voice was respectful, but urgent. "We need to move, if Shadowmere patrols find her here. Frost is right." Kale nodded, though his eyes never left Alara's face. "We need to get you to my territory. Now, you cannot go back to Shadowmere. It is not safe." Alara's eyes went wide. Leave. Just like that. She had nothing. No belongings, no preparations, nothing but the clothes on her back and the herb pouch she used to mask her scent. But she also had no future in Shadowmere. Only more years of invisibility, more years of silence, more years of serving the man who had murdered her parents. This was her chance at something different, something better. As if reading her thoughts, Kael said, "We will send for anything you need later. Right now, your safety is all that matters. Will you come with me, Alara? Will you trust me?" She looked at him, really looked, at the honesty in his ice-blue eyes, at the protective stance of his body, at the way he held her hand like she was something breakable and precious. She thought of Shadowmere, of Victor's cruelty, of 17 years spent invisible and silent and alone. She thought of her grandmother's prophecy and her father's sacrifice and her mother's final words. She thought of the drawings she had made, glowing with silver light, because she had wanted so desperately to protect this man she had never met, and she nodded. "Yes, yes, I will come with you. Yes, I trust you." The smile that broke across Kael's face was like sunrise after the longest night. "Frost, shift. Alara will ride with you. Everyone else, Formation Delta. We are not taking any chances." Within moments, Alara found herself being carefully lifted onto Frost's back. The silver wolf was large enough to carry her easily, and her fur was surprisingly warm. The other wolves formed a protective circle around them, 30 elite warriors moving as one. As they began to run north toward the mountains, Alara looked back one final time at the clearing that had changed her life. Her glowing drawings were already fading, returning to simple lines in snow. But their message had been received. The warning had been heard. Her voice, silent for 17 years, had finally mattered. She turned forward, toward the unknown future racing to meet her, and felt something she had not felt since she was 6 years old. Hope. The northern white peaks rose from the forest like ancient guardians, their snow-capped summits piercing a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. Alara had never seen mountains so tall, never imagined that stone and ice could be shaped into something so majestic. After a lifetime in the dark forests of Shadowmere, this felt like entering another world entirely. The journey had taken most of the day. Frost had carried her tirelessly, the great silver wolf's stride eating up the miles with mechanical precision. The other wolves of the Silent Guard had maintained their protective formation throughout, 30 elite warriors moving as one through terrain that would have been impassable for any ordinary traveler. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the air grew thin and cold, but somehow cleaner. Alara found herself breathing deeper, filling her lungs with air that tasted of pine and snow and freedom. For the first time in 17 years, she was outside Shadowmere territory. For the first time in her life, she was truly free. The packlands of the northern White Peaks sprawled across a high alpine valley, protected on 3 sides by sheer cliffs and accessible only through a series of narrow passes that could be defended by a handful of warriors against an army. It was a fortress shaped by nature, and the wolves who lived here had enhanced those natural defenses with generations of careful construction. But what struck Alara most was not the military strength of the position. It was the warmth. Where Shadowmere was all sharp edges and cold stone, Kael's territory was built with life in mind. The buildings were constructed from pale wood and mountain stone, designed to blend with the snowy landscape while providing shelter from the harsh weather. Smoke rose from 100 chimneys, carrying the scent of cooking food and burning pine. Gardens lay dormant beneath the snow, waiting for spring. Children's laughter echoed from somewhere in the distance. And the people. Everywhere she looked, wolves were going about their business with purpose and confidence. They walked with their heads high and their shoulders straight. They greeted each other with warmth and familiarity. They moved like people who belonged somewhere, who mattered to someone, who had never learned to be invisible. No one here looked like a servant trying not to be noticed. Everyone here looked like they had a place. The Great Hall of the Northern White Peaks was massive, but it managed to feel welcoming rather than intimidating. Enormous fireplaces roared at each end, filling the space with dancing light and blessed warmth. Tapestries depicting the pack's history covered the walls, but these showed scenes of celebration and triumph rather than the bloody conquests that decorated Victor's Hall. The high windows were large and clear, designed to let in maximum light rather than the narrow defensive slits of Shadowmere. Kale led the way inside, but something had changed in his demeanor since they left the border clearing. He moved with the same powerful grace, but there was a tension in his shoulders that had not been there before. His ice-blue eyes kept finding Alara, then sliding away, as if looking at her too long caused him pain. "Sage!" His voice echoed through the hall as he called out. A moment later, an older woman appeared from a side corridor. She had silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind gray eyes that assessed Alara with the practiced speed of someone who had spent decades caring for others. Alpha. Sage's eyebrows rose as she took in Alara's appearance. The servant's clothes stained and worn, the raw, bleeding fingers, the exhausted pallor of her skin. This young woman needs immediate care. Kale nodded, but he did not move closer to Alara. Did not take her hand as he had in the clearing. His voice was formal, almost distant. "This is Alara. She is a soul artist. She has been crossing the border every night for a week to warn us about an assassination plot. She needs rest, food, and medical attention." Sage's eyes widened at the mention of soul artist, but she was too professional to let surprise slow her down. She was already moving toward Alara, already reaching out with gentle hands. "Come, dear, let me take care of you. You look ready to collapse." But Alara's attention was fixed on Kale. On the distance he was maintaining. On the way, he refused to meet her eyes. Something was wrong. In the clearing, he had been warm, protective, almost tender. Now he was pulling away, building walls, closing himself off. The mate bond pulsed between them, demanding connection, demanding closeness. But Kyle was fighting it. She could feel his resistance like a physical barrier. "Alpha," Frost's voice cut through the tension. "The War Council needs to be informed of what we have learned. Time is short." Kyle nodded, relief flickering across his features at the excuse to leave. "I will brief the Council immediately. Frost, assign a guard detail to our guest. Sage, see that she has everything she needs. Our guest, not his mate, not the woman the moon goddess had chosen for him. A guest." Alara felt the rejection like a blade between her ribs, but she was too exhausted to fight it, too overwhelmed by everything that had happened. She allowed Sage to lead her away, following the older woman down a corridor lined with doors and warmth and the scent of herbs. Behind her, she heard Kyle's footsteps moving in the opposite direction, walking away from her. The room Sage brought her to was small but comfortable, with a real bed covered in thick furs and a window that looked out over the snowy mountains. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, filling the space with warmth. After years of sleeping in the servants' quarters of Shadowmere, it felt like a palace. Sage worked with efficient gentleness, examining Alara for injuries, cleaning and bandaging her raw fingers, helping her out of her ruined clothes and into soft sleeping garments. She did not ask questions that required answers, seeming to understand that Alara could not speak. Instead, she kept up a quiet stream of one-sided conversation, her voice soothing and kind. "You have been through quite an ordeal, dear. 7 nights of travel, and in this cold. It is a wonder you are still standing, but you are safe now. Whatever happened before, you are safe in these mountains." She pressed a cup of warm liquid into Alara's hands. "Drink this. It will help you sleep." Alara sipped the mixture, tasting herbs and honey and something that loosened the tight knots of tension in her shoulders. She had not felt safe in 17 years. She was not sure she remembered how. The Alpha. Sage continued as she worked, her voice carefully neutral. He is not himself today. You should not take his distance personally. He carries burdens that most people cannot imagine. Alara looked at her, a question in her eyes. Sage hesitated, then sat down on the edge of the bed with a soft sigh. It is not my story to tell, but you should know that Kael has refused to take a mate for 10 years, has refused to let anyone get close to him. He believes that caring for him is dangerous, that anyone he loves is doomed. She looked at Alara with something like compassion. Finding a mate, especially now, especially like this, it must be terrifying for him. Not because of you, dear, because of what he fears he will do to you. Alara wanted to ask more, but her eyes were growing heavy with exhaustion. The herbs in Sage's drink were taking effect, pulling her down into the first real sleep she had known in weeks. She let herself fall, trusting that for once, for this moment, she did not need to stay alert. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was the image of Kael's face in the clearing. The wonder in his eyes when he realized she was his mate, the warmth that had flared between them like a newborn sun, and then the walls going up, the distance returning, the fear. She dreamed of ice-blue eyes and silver wolves and a king who was afraid to love. 3 days passed before Alara fully understood the nature of Kael's resistance. She had expected him to visit her, to continue what had begun in that snowy clearing, to accept the mate bond that pulsed between them like a living thing. Instead, he kept his distance with deliberate precision. He attended the same meetings she did, included her in every discussion about the coming attack, but he never touched her, never spoke to her alone, never allowed himself to be in the same room with her without others present. It was Frost who finally explained. The Beta had been assigned as Alara's primary contact, a combination of bodyguard and liaison that suited the older woman's no-nonsense demeanor. At 55 years old, Frost had served in the Northern White Peaks military for 3 decades. She had fought in 12 campaigns, survived wounds that would have killed lesser wolves, and risen to the rank of Beta through sheer competence rather than political maneuvering. She was also, Alara realized quickly, exactly what she needed. Most people looked at Alara and saw a victim, a poor mute servant who had suffered terribly and needed to be protected. Frost looked at her and saw something else entirely. "You survived 17 years in enemy territory," Frost said on the second day, as they walked through the training grounds. "You gathered intelligence on an assassination plot without being detected. You crossed the border 7 times without getting caught. You mapped tactical positions with the precision of a trained military analyst." She stopped walking and turned to face Alara directly. Her gray eyes were sharp with assessment. "You are not a victim, Alara. You are an intelligence asset, perhaps the most valuable one we have ever had." Alara blinked at her, startled by the assessment. "The Alpha sees it too," Frost continued. "Why do you think he keeps including you in War Council meetings? He values your mind, your ability to see patterns others miss. Your 17 years of observation in Shadowmere have given you knowledge that our best spies would kill for." She resumed walking, her boots crunching on the packed snow. "But he cannot separate that from what the mate bond demands. He cannot look at you without feeling the pull, and he cannot accept the pull without confronting his fear." Alara made a questioning gesture, and Frost understood. His sister. 10 years ago. Lyra was her name. She was born mute, like you. Something wrong with her throat from birth. Could never make a sound. They had reached a wooden bench overlooking the training field, where young wolves practiced combat drills under the watchful eyes of veteran instructors. Frost sat down heavily, her expression distant with memory. Kael adored her, protected her fiercely. But Lyra was tired of being protected. She wanted to prove she could contribute, could be more than just the Alpha's fragile little sister. So when intelligence came about a rogue encampment, she begged to go along on the mission, not to fight, just to observe, to learn. Frost's jaw tightened. Kael was young then, 25, confident, maybe too confident. He had never lost a battle, never made a strategic mistake. He believed he was invincible, so he agreed. took Lyra along on what should have been a simple strike. Alara knew what was coming, could see it in the shadows that crossed Frost's weathered face. The intelligence was false. A trap. The rogues had twice the numbers we expected, in a position we had not anticipated. 200 wolves walked into that canyon. 53 walked out. Frost's voice had gone flat. The tone of someone who had told this story too many times, felt its weight too heavily. Lyra was not among the survivors. Kyle found her body afterward. She had tried to hide, tried to stay out of the fighting as she had been told, but the rogues found her. They killed her slowly. Alara closed her eyes. She understood now. Understood the walls Kyle had built, the distance he maintained, the fear that drove him to reject even the bond the moon goddess had given him. He blamed himself, still blames himself. Frost continued. He believes his arrogance killed 200 wolves, killed his sister. He has spent 10 years trying to atone for that mistake, making himself listen to every voice, consider every angle, never act without being certain. That is why they call him the listening king. She looked at Alara with something like sympathy. And that is why he cannot accept you, not because he does not want to, but because he is terrified of what loving someone will cost. Cost you. Cost him. Cost this pack that he has rebuilt from the ashes of his failure. Alara sat with that knowledge for a long moment. Then she raised her hands and began to sign, hoping Frost would understand. She did. The Beta had spent 2 days teaching Alara the sign language that the Northern White Peaks Pack had developed for their mute members. It was not comprehensive yet, but it was enough for basic communication. "How do I reach him?" Alara signed. "How do I show him I am not fragile?" Frost's smile was thin but genuine. "The same way you reached him with your drawings. Through action, not words. Through proving your value until he cannot deny it. Through being so damn useful that he has to see you as a partner rather than a liability." She stood, gesturing for Alara to follow. "Come, the War Council meets in an hour. Time to show them what you can do." The War Council of the Northern White Peaks gathered in a circular chamber deep within the Great Hall. The room was designed for serious discussion, with a large central table covered in maps and documents, surrounded by seats for the pack's military leadership. Torches lined the walls, casting steady light that left no shadows where secrets could hide. Kyle sat at the head of the table, his platinum hair braided back in the warrior style. Frost took the seat to his right, her position as Beta clearly established. Granite, the Gamma, sat to his left, a massive man with shoulders like a mountain and hands that could crush stone. Around them sat a dozen other officers, each representing a different aspect of the pack's military structure. And at the far end of the table, in a seat that had clearly been added recently, sat Alara. Kyle's eyes found her as she entered, then quickly looked away. But not before she saw the flash of pain that crossed his features. The mate bond was pulling at him, demanding connection. He was fighting it with everything he had. "Let us begin." His voice was formal, controlled. "We have received intelligence about an assassination attempt planned for the Peace Festival. Alara, you gathered this information. Please share what you know." All eyes turned to her. Alara felt the weight of their scrutiny, the skepticism in some faces, the curiosity in others. A mute servant from an enemy territory sitting in a war council. It must seem absurd to them, but Frost had taught her something important over the past 2 days. Her silence was not weakness. It was power. She could communicate volumes without saying a word. She stood and moved to the central table, where a blank map of the festival grounds lay ready. She had requested it earlier, knowing this moment would come. Now she picked up a charcoal pencil and began to draw. Her gift as a soul artist was still developing, still uncertain, but regular drawing did not require magic, only skill. And skill she had in abundance. She sketched the festival grounds as Victor's men had described them. The main pavilion where Kyle would greet visiting alphas, the surrounding tents and stages, the paths and clearings where crowds would gather. Then she began adding the attack positions. 20 wolves from the north entrance, She wrote the words beside her drawings, her handwriting neat and precise. 15 from the eastern flank, 15 more to cut off the western retreat. She drew arrows showing movement patterns, marked the likely positions of secondary ambush points, indicated the routes the rogues would use to escape after the assassination was complete. When she finished, she stepped back and let the council study her work. Granite was the first to speak. His deep voice rumbled like distant thunder. "This is remarkably detailed. How can we be certain it is accurate?" Alara wrote quickly on a blank piece of paper. "I spent 7 nights observing their planning sessions. Victor and Draven discussed every aspect of the operation. They did not know I was listening. They never do." 7 nights? One of the other officers, a lean man with a scarred face, leaned forward. "You expect us to believe a servant infiltrated high-level military planning sessions for a week without being detected?" Alara met his eyes steadily and wrote again. "They look through servants. We are invisible to them. It is our greatest weakness and our greatest strength." Silence fell over the council. Then Frost spoke, her voice carrying the weight of her rank and experience. "I have reviewed her previous drawings, the ones she left at the border. The tactical analysis is consistent with what I would expect from Victor's forces, based on our intelligence about Shadowmere's military doctrine. The level of detail suggests direct observation rather than second-hand information." She looked around the table, meeting each officer's eyes in turn. "I believe she is telling the truth." More silence. Then Kale spoke. "There is something else." His voice was carefully controlled, but Alara could hear the tension beneath it. "Something that makes this intelligence even more critical." He gestured to Alara. "Show them Draven." She had not drawn the mercenary leader yet in this session, but she had brought her journal. She opened it to the page where she had rendered Draven's portrait in the snow, recreated now in charcoal with even more detail. The scar across his jaw, the empty eyes, the stance of a trained killer. And beneath the portrait, the symbol she had added, the insignia of a Delta officer in the Northern White Peaks military structure. Recognition rippled around the table. Several officers leaned forward, eyes widening with shock. "Delta Commander Draven." Granite's voice had gone hard as his namesake. "He served under you for 5 years, Alpha. He was in the canyon. He survived. And then he disappeared." Kale's jaw was tight with contained fury. "We assumed he had died in the wilderness, unable to live with the memory. Instead, he went to work for Victor. He has been selling his knowledge of our tactics, our weaknesses, our command structure." He looked at Alara with something like grudging respect. "If our artist had not included that symbol, we would have planned our defense according to standard doctrine. Draven would have anticipated every move. We would have walked into a second trap." Alara felt warmth spread through her chest at his acknowledgement, but she was not finished. She picked up her pencil again and began to write rapidly. "There is another problem. Draven knows how you think. He served with you for 5 years. He understands your tactics. Any standard response will be predicted." She looked directly at Kale as she continued writing. "You cannot fight this battle as yourself. You must become someone else. Someone he does not know how to counter." The council erupted in muttered discussions, but Kael's eyes stayed fixed on Alara. She saw understanding dawn in those ice-blue depths, saw him recognize what she was really saying. His sister had died because he was arrogant, because he attacked without thinking, because he trusted in his own invincibility. He had spent 10 years learning to be careful, measured, predictable. Now she was telling him that his caution had become a weakness, that Draven would exploit his patterns just as surely as his enemies had exploited his arrogance a decade ago. She was telling him that he needed to change again, to find a new balance between the reckless young Alpha who had gotten 200 wolves killed and the overcautious king who was about to lose his life to a man who knew him too well. "What do you suggest?" Kale's voice was quiet, but every officer at the table heard the weight behind the question. Alara hesitated. Then she began to draw again, this time not tactical positions, something more abstract. A wolf that split into many wolves, a single point of attack becoming multiple feints, a straight line becoming a spiral. "Unpredictability," she wrote. Let them think they know where you will be, then be somewhere else. Let them think they understand your formation. Then use a formation you have never used before. She added more detail. Bait. Your most predictable officers in the positions Draven expects. Your most adaptable units hidden where he will not think to look. Make him commit to his plan, then shatter it. The scarred officer who had questioned her earlier was nodding slowly. Fluid response doctrine. It is an old technique, but we have not used it in decades. Draven would have no experience countering it. Because you stopped using it after the canyon, Frost added, understanding lighting her eyes. You retreated to defensive formations, predictable responses. Safe tactics that Draven has spent years learning to exploit. Granite finished. This servant has just identified our greatest vulnerability. Elara. Kael's voice cut through the murmurs. Her name on his lips sent a shiver through her, despite everything. She is not a servant. She is a strategic asset, and her counsel will be treated with the respect it deserves. He stood, and every wolf in the room straightened instinctively. We have 2 weeks to prepare a response Draven will not expect. I want new formations designed by tomorrow. Frost, work with Elara to develop alternatives based on her intelligence. Granite, begin retraining the Silent Guard in fluid doctrine. His eyes swept the table. We will not walk into another trap. Not this time. Dismissed. The officers filed out, talking among themselves in low, urgent voices. But Kael remained, and when Elara moved to follow the others, his voice stopped her. Stay, please. It was the first time he had asked to be alone with her since the clearing. Elara turned back to face him. He stood on the opposite side of the table, a careful distance maintained between them. But his eyes were different now, less guarded, more uncertain. I owe you an explanation, he said quietly. For my behavior these past days? Elara waited, her heart pounding in her chest. Kael took a breath. When I felt the mate bond in that clearing, my first instinct was joy, pure, overwhelming joy. After 10 years of believing I did not deserve happiness, the goddess saw fit to give me you. His voice cracked slightly. And then I remembered what happened the last time I allowed myself to care about someone, what my caring cost them, and all I could feel was terror. He moved around the table, closing some of the distance between them. Elara stood frozen, watching him approach. My sister, Lyra. She was mute from birth, something wrong with her throat. She never spoke a single word in her 16 years of life, but she found other ways to communicate. Signs, gestures, expressions. She was the bravest, brightest person I ever knew. He stopped an arm's length away, and I killed her, not with my own hands, but with my arrogance, with my certainty that I could not fail. I let her come on that mission because I was too proud to admit that I could not guarantee her safety. Elara wanted to reach out to him, to offer comfort, but she sensed that he needed to finish, needed to speak these words that had been trapped inside him for a decade. When I found you in that clearing, Kael continued, when I realized you were mute, that you were an artist who spoke through images, that you had spent your life being invisible and overlooked. All I could see was Lyra. All I could feel was the certainty that caring for you would destroy you, just as caring for her destroyed her. He closed his eyes. I have been running from you because I am terrified, not of you, of myself, of what I will do to you if I allow this bond to complete. Elara raised her hands and signed slowly, hoping he would understand. She had spent the past 2 days learning the pack's sign language. Now she prayed that her vocabulary was sufficient. You think silence equals fragility, she signed. But I have survived 17 years in the territory of the man who murdered my family. I have walked through darkness alone. I have made myself invisible not because I am weak, but because it kept me alive. She stepped closer, closing the distance he had maintained. She could feel the mate bond thrumming between them, demanding connection. Your sister died because of a trap. Elara continued signing. Not because you loved her. Love did not kill her. The enemy did. And your guilt has been killing you ever since. Kael's eyes opened. They glistened with unshed tears. I have spent 10 years listening to everyone except myself, he whispered, trying to make sure I never miss another warning, never overlook another threat. But I stopped listening to what I needed, what I wanted. I convinced myself that wanting anything was dangerous. Alara signed again. Then listen now. Listen to me. I do not need you to be perfect. I do not need you to protect me from the world. I need you to trust me. To see me as a partner, not a liability. Can you do that? For a long moment, Kael did not respond. Then slowly, he reached out and took her hands in his. I do not know, he said honestly. I have spent so long being afraid. I do not know if I can stop. His grip tightened. But I want to try. For you. For us. For the chance to be something other than the man who failed everyone he loved. Alara squeezed back. Then we learned together. One day at a time. It was not a resolution. Not a fairy tale ending where true love conquered all. It was a beginning. A first step on a long road that neither of them could see the end of. But it was enough. For now, it was enough. The library of the Northern White Peaks was Alara's favorite place in the entire territory. It occupied the top floor of the Great Hall's western tower, a circular room lined from floor to ceiling with books and scrolls and documents accumulated over centuries. Wide windows looked out over the mountains, flooding the space with natural light during the day and starlight at night. Comfortable chairs clustered around reading tables, and the scent of old paper and leather binding filled the air. Alara had been spending her evenings here, researching everything she could find about Victor, about Shadowmere, about the history that had led to this moment. Frost had given her permission to access even the classified military records, recognizing that her intelligence-gathering abilities were too valuable to limit. It was on the 5th night that she found it. The file was old, its paper yellowed with age, tucked into the back of a cabinet that clearly had not been opened in years. The label on the outside read, Cassius of Shadowmere, Trial Records, sealed by order of Alpha King Aldrich. Aldrich. Her father's name, but not her father. This Aldrich had been Kael's father, the previous Alpha King of the Northern White Peaks, who had died of natural causes 8 years ago. Ilara's hands trembled as she opened the file. The trial had taken place 20 years ago. Cassius, younger brother of Victor of Shadowmere, had been accused of conspiracy to assassinate the Alpha King. The evidence presented included testimony from multiple witnesses, documents allegedly written in Cassius's hand, and the word of a trusted informant who claimed to have heard Cassius planning the attack. Cassius had maintained his innocence throughout. He had claimed the documents were forgeries, the witnesses bribed or coerced. He had begged for more time to prove his claims. He had been executed anyway, on the order of Alpha King Aldrich. Alara turned the pages with growing dread. She reached the list of witnesses who had testified against Cassius, and there, third from the top, she found a name that stopped her heart. Aldrich, chief tracker of Shadowmere territory, her father. Her father had testified against Cassius at his trial. She kept reading, her vision blurring with tears she did not fully understand. Her father's testimony had been damning. He claimed to have overheard Cassius discussing the assassination with unknown co-conspirators. He provided details of times, places, specific phrases. His word had been critical in securing the conviction. But there was more. A supplementary document added to the file 2 years after the trial. A letter, written in her father's distinctive handwriting, addressed to the Alpha King. Your Majesty, I write to confess a grievous sin. The testimony I provided at the trial of Cassius of Shadowmere was false. I was coerced into lying by advisors within your court who promised retribution against my family if I refused. I do not know if Cassius was truly guilty, but I know that my words helped condemn him. I can no longer live with this weight on my conscience. I am prepared to testify again, to tell the truth, whatever the cost to myself. I only pray that somehow justice can still be served. The letter was dated 17 years ago, just months before her parents were murdered. Alara sat in the library for a long time, staring at the documents that rewrote everything she thought she knew about her family. Her father had been a false witness, had helped condemn an innocent man to death, had been coerced into doing so by powerful people who had threatened his family. And when he tried to make it right, when he wrote this letter seeking to correct his wrong, Someone had killed him, killed her mother, tried to kill her. Victor had not murdered her parents out of random cruelty. He had murdered them because her father was a witness in the trial that killed his brother, a witness who was trying to recant his testimony and reveal the truth. The conspiracy went deeper than she had imagined, deeper than Victor's revenge. Someone in Kael's father's court had orchestrated the false testimony, had protected themselves by silencing her father before he could expose them, and that someone might still be alive, might still be in a position of power, might still be willing to kill to keep their secrets buried. Elara gathered the documents carefully, her mind racing through the implications. She needed to show Kael, needed to tell him what she had discovered, but she also needed to be careful. If the conspirators learned that these records had been found, that their 20-year-old crime was about to be exposed, they might act to silence her, just as they had silenced her father. She hid the documents in her journal and made her way back to her room, her heart heavy with the weight of truths she wished she had never learned. Her father was not the innocent victim she had always believed him to be. He had made a terrible choice, had helped kill an innocent man, but he had tried to make it right. He had tried to seek justice, even knowing what it would cost him, and it had cost him everything. Elara understood something then, something that would change how she approached the coming confrontation with Victor. Victor was not simply a monster. He was a brother who had lost a sibling to injustice. He had spent 20 years seeking the truth, seeking vengeance, and somewhere along the way, his righteous anger had curdled into something darker, something that no longer distinguished between the guilty and the innocent. Her father had been guilty of false testimony. Victor had been right to want justice for his brother. But that did not justify the murder of her mother, who had done nothing wrong, did not justify the planned assassination of Kael, who had been a child when Cassius died, did not justify the deaths of the hundreds who would die if Victor's attack succeeded. Victor had begun as a victim seeking justice. He had become the villain he once fought against. It was a warning, Elara realized, a warning about what grief and anger could do to a person if left unchecked for too long, a warning about the price of revenge. She thought of Kael, carrying his guilt for 10 years, punishing himself for his sister's death. Would he become like Victor if given enough time? Would his self-hatred curdle into something that hurt others? She thought of herself, 17 years of silence, 17 years of hiding. Had she become so skilled at invisibility that she had forgotten how to exist? Had survival become a prison of its own? These thoughts consumed her as she returned to her room and found Kael waiting at her door. He looked uncertain, almost shy, a strange expression on a man who commanded armies and ruled a territory. But when he saw her face, saw the shadows in her eyes, his uncertainty transformed into concern. "What happened?" he asked. "What did you find?" Elara hesitated. Then she handed him the documents. She watched him read, watched the color drain from his face as he understood what he was seeing. His father's name on the execution order, her father's testimony, the letter of recantation, the dates that lined up so perfectly with her parents' murder. Moon goddess. He breathed when he finished. Cassius was innocent. Victor has been right all along. He looked at Elara with horror in his eyes. My father killed an innocent man, used false testimony to justify it. And when your father tried to tell the truth, someone silenced him. He sat down heavily, the documents shaking in his hands. All these years, I believed Victor was simply power-hungry, simply ambitious. I never imagined. Elara sat beside him, close enough to touch, but not quite touching. She signed slowly, knowing he had been learning the pack's sign language alongside her. Victor is still wrong, she signed. His brother may have been innocent, but that does not justify what he has become, does not justify the innocent lives he has taken or plans to take. Kael nodded slowly. I know, but this changes things. We have to acknowledge the injustice done to Cassius. Even if Victor must be stopped, his brother deserves to have his name cleared. He looked at the documents again, then at Elara. Someone in my father's court orchestrated this, coerced witnesses, possibly even framed Cassius entirely. That person may still be alive, may still have influence. Elara signed. Then we find them. After we deal with Victor. After we survive the festival. After. Kael agreed. He reached out tentatively and took her hand. His grip was gentle, almost asking permission. I am sorry for what my family did to yours. I know the words are inadequate. Alara squeezed his hand and signed with the other. My father was not innocent either. He made choices that harmed others. But he tried to make it right. He died trying to tell the truth. She met Kael's eyes. We cannot change what our fathers did. We can only choose what we do now. Choose to be better. Choose justice over vengeance. Choose each other. Kael added quietly. Despite everything. Because of everything. Alara signed. We understand loss. We understand guilt. We understand what happens when good intentions go wrong. Maybe that means we can build something different. Something better. For the first time since the clearing, Kael smiled. A small smile, tentative and fragile, but real. I would like that, he said. I would like to try. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Alara worked alongside Frost and the strategic planning team, helping them design formations and tactics that Draven would not expect. Her knowledge of Shadowmere's military culture proved invaluable, filling gaps in their intelligence and correcting assumptions that could have proven fatal. She also continued developing her soul artist abilities, spending hours each day practicing under Sage's supervision. The gift was growing stronger, more controllable. She could now create small manifestations at will, glowing images that hovered in the air for several minutes before fading. The tactical applications were obvious. Illusions on a battlefield could misdirect enemy forces, create confusion, by precious seconds that meant the difference between victory and defeat. Kael trained with the Silent Guard, relearning the fluid doctrine that they had abandoned a decade ago. It went against his every instinct, against the cautious predictability he had cultivated for years, but he pushed through the discomfort, understanding that growth required change and change required risk. He and Alara grew closer during this time, though their relationship remained complicated. They talked for hours each evening, sharing memories and fears and hopes for the future. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's boundaries, each other's ways of communicating. The mate bond pulled at them constantly, demanding completion, but they held back, waiting until the crisis was past to fully commit. It was healthier this way, Alara realized. The bond would have pushed them together regardless of compatibility, regardless of trust. By resisting its urgency, they were building something real, something that would last beyond the initial fire of supernatural connection. But there were moments when resistance became almost impossible. Like the night before the festival, when they stood together on the observation platform at the top of the western tower. The mountains spread out before them, silver and white under a full moon. The air was cold and crisp, and full of the scent of approaching snow. Tomorrow, Kael said quietly. It all comes together tomorrow. Alara signed. Are you ready? No, he admitted. I have spent 10 years preparing for threats, planning for dangers, but I do not know if I am ready for this. So much depends on things going right. He turned to face her. So much depends on you. Your intelligence made this possible. Your soul artist gift will create the illusions we need, if anything goes wrong. She pressed a finger to his lips, silencing him. Nothing will go wrong because we have prepared. And even if something unexpected happens, we will adapt. Together. Together. He repeated the word like a promise. I spent 10 years alone, keeping everyone at a distance, refusing to let anyone share my burdens. It was safer, I told myself. Easier. His eyes met hers in the moonlight. I was wrong. Isolation is not safety. It is a different kind of death. A slow erosion of everything that makes life worth living. Alara signed. I know. I spent 17 years being invisible, telling myself it was survival. But survival without connection is not really living. It is just waiting to die. Then we stop waiting, Kael said. We start living. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever comes after, we face it together. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she did not, he cupped her face in his hands with infinite gentleness. "I am still afraid." He admitted, "I may always be afraid, but I am more afraid of losing you than I am of loving you. So I choose this. I choose you, whatever the cost." Alara leaned into his touch, feeling the mate bond surge between them. Tomorrow, the battle. Tonight, this moment. She signed, "I choose you too." And when he kissed her, gentle and searching and full of promise, the night seemed to hold its breath around them. Two broken people finding wholeness in each other. Two silent hearts learning to speak. Tomorrow they would face Victor and Draven and 50 rogue warriors bent on assassination. But tonight, there was this. There was hope. There was the beginning of something worth fighting for. The silent guard stood ready in the darkness below. The plans were laid. The trap was set. And Alara, the mute servant who had spent 17 years being invisible, would finally step into the light. The morning of the Peace Festival dawned cold and brilliant, sunlight streaming across fresh snow that blanketed the ceremonial grounds in pristine white. Banners from a dozen territories snapped in the mountain wind, their colors vivid against the pale landscape. The scent of roasting meat and mulled wine drifted from the preparation tents, and the sound of musicians tuning their instruments created a backdrop of pleasant anticipation. To any observer, it looked like the perfect setting for celebration. A gathering of the Northern Territories to reaffirm their commitment to peace and prosperity. Wolves from distant packs mingled freely, renewing old friendships and forging new connections. Children ran laughing through the snow, while their parents exchanged news and gossip. But beneath the festive surface, warriors moved into position with silent precision. Alara stood on a raised platform near the main pavilion, dressed not in servant's clothes, but in the silver and white of the northern white peaks. Her hair was braided back from her face, woven with crystals that caught the light. A cloak of white fur draped her shoulders against the cold. She looked nothing like the invisible servant who had scrubbed floors in Shadowmere. She looked like someone who mattered. Beside her, Frost surveyed the grounds with the practiced eye of a veteran commander. The Beta had positioned herself as Alara's primary guard, but her true purpose was coordination. Through subtle hand signals and prearranged movements, she maintained contact with the 50 warriors hidden throughout the festival grounds. The trap was set. Now they waited for the prey. Victor arrived at midday with his delegation from Shadowmere. Alara watched him enter the grounds, her heart pounding against her ribs. He looked exactly as she remembered from years of observing him from the shadows, tall and powerful, with steel-gray hair and eyes that calculated everything they saw. He moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of a predator who had never known fear. He did not recognize her. Why would he? She had been furniture to him, a mute servant who scrubbed his floors and carried his firewood. He had looked through her 1,000 times without ever truly seeing her. Today, he would see her. Today, everyone would see her. Victor approached the main pavilion where Kale waited to greet visiting alphas. The two men clasped forearms in the traditional greeting, their faces masks of diplomatic courtesy. To anyone watching, they appeared to be neighbors meeting as equals, putting aside old tensions in the spirit of peace. Only Alara saw the hatred that flickered in Victor's eyes. Only she knew that in a few hours, this man planned to murder Kale and everyone who stood with him. The afternoon passed with agonizing slowness. There were ceremonies to observe, speeches to endure, toasts to peace and prosperity that rang hollow in Alara's ears. She maintained her position on the platform, watching the crowd, waiting for the signal that would mean the attack had begun. Frost had explained the timing. Draven would wait until the sun began to set, when the wine had been flowing for hours, and reflexes were dulled by food and drink. The rogues would strike during the final ceremony, when all attention was focused on the main pavilion and the surrounding areas were relatively clear. It was a sound tactical plan. It might have worked against a target who did not know it was coming. The sun touched the western mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and crimson. The crowd began gathering for the final ceremony, the ritual blessing that would close the festival and send everyone home with the goddess's favor. Kael took his place at the center of the pavilion, surrounded by the visiting alphas and their delegations. He looked calm, composed, every inch the listening king. But Alara could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight tightening around his eyes. He knew what was coming. He was ready. She hoped they were all ready. The first sign of the attack was subtle, a ripple of movement at the northern edge of the grounds where the tree line met the cleared area. Then the same at the eastern flank. Then the west. 3 groups of wolves emerging from concealment, moving fast and low through the gathering darkness. 50 rogues in total, just as Draven had planned. They had painted their fur with dark mud to blend with the shadows, and they carried weapons that glinted with cruel purpose. The crowd had not noticed yet. The music was still playing. The ceremony was proceeding. But in a few seconds, chaos would erupt. Alara raised her hands and began to draw in the air. Her soul artist gift had grown stronger over the past 2 weeks, fed by practice and purpose and the power of the mate bond. Now she called on that gift with everything she had, pulling silver light from the depths of her soul and shaping it with the precision of a master artist. Illusions bloomed across the festival grounds. To the attacking rogues, it appeared that Kael had suddenly multiplied. 5 identical figures stood where one had been a moment ago, each moving independently, each appearing equally real. The visiting alphas seemed to scatter in random directions, their positions impossible to track. The entire layout of the pavilion shifted, walls appearing where open space had been, exits closing off, the familiar terrain becoming a maze of confusion. Draven's voice cut through the night. "It is a trick. Ignore the illusions. Strike for the real targets." But that was easier said than done. Alara's illusions were not simple images. They were crafted by a soul artist whose gift made imagination into reality. They moved and breathed and cast shadows. They responded to the environment with perfect accuracy. Even knowing they were false, the rogues could not tell which figures were real and which were light given form. The silent guard struck while the enemy hesitated. They did not emerge in the defensive formation Draven expected. They did not cluster around Kael in a protective circle. Instead, they attacked in small groups of 5, fluid and fast, hitting the rogues from angles that should have been impossible. Frost had designed the formations based on Alara's intelligence. Each group knew exactly where the enemy would be, exactly how they would move. They exploited weaknesses Draven did not know he had revealed. They turned his carefully planned ambush into a chaotic melee where his numerical advantage meant nothing. The battle lasted 23 minutes. It was not a clean victory. War never was. Several of the silent guard fell to rogue blades, their blood staining the pristine snow. Festival guests who had not evacuated quickly enough were caught in the crossfire, their screams adding to the chaos. The eastern flank held longer than expected, their commander adapting more quickly than his fellows to the unexpected tactics. But in the end, the outcome was never truly in doubt. Kael's wolves were better trained, better led, and most importantly, better informed. They knew every move the rogues would make before they made it. They countered every tactic, blocked every escape route, exploited every weakness. By the time full darkness fell, 43 of the 50 rogues were dead or captured. The remaining 7 had fled into the mountains, where pursuit teams would hunt them down in the days to come. And Draven the Shadow knelt in the bloody snow with Kael's blade at his throat. The crowd had been evacuated to safe positions. The wounded were being tended by healers. The dead were being collected with respectful care. Only the inner circle remained. Kael and his officers, Alara and Frost, the captured rogues under heavy guard, and Victor, restrained but uninjured, his delegation having surrendered without resistance once the battle turned against them. Kael stood over Draven, his platinum hair loose and wild, his ceremonial clothes stained with blood that was mostly not his own. His ice-blue eyes were fixed on the man who had once served him with honor. 10 years. Kael's voice was quiet, but it carried across the silent grounds. 10 years since you disappeared. I thought you were dead, Draven. I mourned you. I added your name to the memorial with the others who died in the canyon. Draven's laugh was bitter, broken. You mourned me. How touching. Did you mourn the others as well? The 15 wolves in my unit who died because you were too arrogant to verify the intelligence? The men who trusted me to lead them? Who followed me because I followed you? I remember all of them, Cale said. Every name, every face. I have carried them with me every day since. Carried them, Draven spat. Like baggage, like a burden. But you got to live. You got to go home to your warm palace and your loyal subjects and your reputation as the great Alpha King, while the rest of us rotted in that canyon. His eyes burned with a decade of suppressed rage. Do you know what I did for a year after I crawled out of that slaughter? I wandered, lived like an animal, tried to drink myself to death because the memories would not stop. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. Every time I slept, I heard their screams. Cale's jaw tightened, but he did not look away. I understand, more than you know. I have spent 10 years trying to atone for what happened, trying to become a better leader, trying to make sure it never happened again. Atone. Draven laughed again, the sound jagged with pain. You do not get to atone, not while you are still wearing that crown, not while you are still enjoying the power that our blood purchased. He lunged forward despite the blade at his throat, forcing Cale to step back. I wanted you to feel what I felt, wanted you to lose everything the way I lost everything. That is why I took Victor's gold, not for the money, for the chance to make you hurt. For a long moment, Cale was silent. Then he lowered his blade. I cannot give you back what you lost, he said quietly. I cannot bring back the dead. I cannot undo the mistake that cost so many lives. But I can give you something I should have given you 10 years ago. He met Draven's eyes directly. I am sorry. Not a strategic apology for political purposes. A real one, from one wolf to another. I failed you. I failed all of you. And I have been failing you every day since by not acknowledging that failure publicly. Draven stared at him, confusion warring with rage on his scarred face. You deserved better, Cale continued. You deserved a leader who listened instead of assuming, who verified instead of attacking, who valued your lives more than his own reputation. I was not that leader. I do not know if I am now, but I am trying. He sheathed his blade. You will face justice for your crimes here today. Men died because of your choices, but your grievance against me was legitimate. It will be acknowledged. And if you survive your sentence, there may be a place for you here again, not as an officer, but as someone who once served honorably and lost his way. Draven's expression was unreadable. Why? Why offer me anything? I tried to kill you, because I understand, Cale said simply. Because anger that deep does not come from nowhere, and because everyone deserves a chance to find their way back from the darkness. He gestured to the guards. Take him to secure holding. Treat him with dignity. As Draven was led away, Elara saw something shift in his eyes. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, but perhaps the first crack in the wall of hatred he had built around his heart. It would have to be enough for now. Victor had watched the exchange in silence, his face an unreadable mask. Now Cale turned to face him, and the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Alpha Victor of Shadowmere. Cale's voice carried the formal weight of judgment. You stand accused of conspiracy to commit murder, of hiring rogues to attack a peace festival, of plotting the assassination of a sovereign Alpha. Victor's laugh was cold. You can add 20 years of planning to that list if you like. I have been working toward this moment since your father murdered my brother. The words hung in the air like poison. Cassius. Cale nodded slowly. I know about Cassius. I know he was innocent of the charges that led to his execution. I know my father was wrong. Victor's mask cracked, surprise breaking through. You know, I learned recently, from documents that had been buried for 2 decades, including the letter from a witness who tried to recant his testimony. Cale's eyes moved to Elara, a witness whose family was murdered to keep him silent. Victor followed his gaze. For the first time he truly looked at Elara, studied her face, her silver-white hair, her silent, watchful presence. Recognition slowly dawned in his eyes. You. His voice was barely a whisper. The tracker's daughter. The child who survived. Alara stepped forward, her heart pounding, but her posture straight and proud. She raised her hands and signed, Frost translating her words for all to hear. Aldrich was my father. You had him killed 17 years ago. You had my mother killed. You tried to kill me. Victor's expression was strange, not triumphant, not cruel, almost sad. Your father destroyed my brother, he said quietly. His false testimony was the key evidence that convicted Cassius. Without it, the case would have failed. My brother would have lived. Alara signed again. My father did not act alone. He was coerced, threatened, told his family would be harmed if he did not cooperate. I know. Victor's admission shocked everyone present. I learned that later, years later, after I had already ordered his death. He closed his eyes. When I finally understood the full truth, when I learned that Aldrich had tried to recant, had been silenced before he could reveal the conspiracy, I felt something I had not felt in years. Doubt. His eyes opened again. But by then it was too late. Your parents were dead, and I had spent so long hating, so long planning revenge, that I did not know how to stop. The hatred had become the only thing keeping me alive. Alara's hands moved again. You killed my mother. She was innocent, had nothing to do with the trial. I know. Victor's voice was heavy with something that might have been regret. She was not the target. She was not supposed to be there. But once the attack began, there was no controlling it. War is like that. Once you release it, it consumes everything in its path, innocent and guilty alike. He looked at her with an expression that was almost pleading. I do not ask your forgiveness. I do not deserve it. But you should know that I have spent 17 years wondering if your father was right, if Cassius would have wanted me to become what I became in his name. He probably would not have. But knowing that did not stop me. The hatred was too strong. The need for justice had curdled into something uglier, something that did not care who got hurt anymore. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of Victor's confession hung over them like a physical presence. 20 years of rage and grief and revenge finally laid bare. Then Alara signed her response. You began as a brother seeking justice. What happened to Cassius was wrong. He deserved to be vindicated, and you deserved to know the truth. But justice became vengeance, and vengeance made you into the very thing you hated. She stepped closer to him, close enough to see the lines of age and bitterness carved into his face. My father was not innocent. He made choices that harmed others, but he tried to make it right. He died trying to tell the truth. You killed him before he could finish what he started. Victor nodded slowly. Yes, I did. Alara's hands moved again. You took my family, my voice. 17 years of my life spent hiding in shadows because you could not let go of your hatred. I have every reason to want you dead. She paused, her next sign slow and deliberate. But if I let hatred consume me the way it consumed you, then you win. Then everything you did, everything you became, spreads to me like a disease. And I refuse. I refuse to let your darkness become my darkness. She stepped back, her signs continuing. I do not forgive you. I may never forgive you. But I choose not to hate you. I choose to let justice take its course without adding my rage to the fire. And I choose to honor my father by doing what he tried to do, by telling the truth, by seeking real justice instead of revenge. Victor stared at her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. You are stronger than I ever was, stronger than I could have imagined. The tracker raised a remarkable daughter. He looked at Kael. I am ready for your judgment, Alpha King, whatever it may be. Kael's response was measured, formal, but not without compassion. The charges against you are severe. Conspiracy, murder, crimes that have caused immeasurable suffering. You will be held for trial before the Council of Alphas, where all evidence will be presented and judgment will be rendered. He paused. But I will also present the evidence of my father's role in Cassius's wrongful execution. Your brother's name will be cleared. His innocence will be acknowledged publicly. The injustice done to your family will finally be recognized. Victor closed his eyes. "After 20 years, after everything I have done, now you offer what I wanted from the beginning, because it should have been offered from the beginning," Kale said. "The truth does not care about timing. It does not care about politics or convenience. It is simply the truth. And it deserves to be told, no matter how late." The guards moved forward to take Victor into custody, but before they could reach him, he spoke one last time. "The ones who orchestrated my brother's frame, they may still be alive, still in positions of power. I spent years trying to identify them, but they covered their tracks well." He looked at Kael directly. "Your father was deceived as much as anyone. I understand that now. But someone used him, used the trial, used my brother's death for their own purposes. Find them. Make sure they cannot do to anyone else what they did to us." Kael nodded once. "I will." Victor was led away, his shoulders straight despite the chains. He did not look back. 2 weeks after the battle, under a full moon that turned the snow to silver, Elara and Kael stood before their pack for the mating ceremony. The great hall had been transformed. Thousands of candles filled the space with warm, flickering light. Winter flowers imported from the southern territories filled crystal vases, their fragrance mingling with pine and wood smoke. The pack had gathered in their finest clothes, filling every seat and lining every wall. But this was not a grand royal wedding. There was no political posturing, no display of wealth and power. Kael had insisted on keeping the ceremony small, intimate, focused on what truly mattered. Frost stood as witness, her weathered face soft with something approaching maternal pride. Sage presided over the ceremony, her voice carrying the ancient words that would bind two souls together in the eyes of the goddess. Elara wore white and silver, her gown simple but elegant, her hair flowing loose down her back woven with crystals and moonflowers. She looked nothing like the invisible servant who had scrubbed floors in silence. She looked like a queen. Kael wore traditional ceremonial furs, his platinum hair braided in the old warrior style, but his eyes held none of the cold distance that had marked him for so long. When he looked at Elara, his gaze was warm, open, full of a tenderness that had taken 10 years of isolation to unlock. The ceremony proceeded through the traditional stages, the exchange of vows, the offering of gifts, the blessing of the pack. Each element carried weight and meaning that had accumulated over centuries of tradition. When the time came for the marking, for the final act that would complete the mate bond and make them one in the eyes of the goddess, Sage stepped back and silence fell over the hall. Kael took Alara's hands in his. "I came to that clearing expecting to find a threat," he said, his voice carrying to every ear. "A spy or a trap or some new danger to add to the endless list. Instead, I found you, a woman who had every reason to hide, to stay silent, to protect herself, and who chose instead to risk everything for a stranger." He lifted her hands to his lips. "I spent 10 years believing I did not deserve happiness, believing that anyone I loved was doomed to suffer. You showed me that isolation is not safety. It is just a slower kind of death." His eyes glistened but did not spill over. "I do not promise to be perfect. I will make mistakes. I will have days when the old fears return and I want to push you away. But I promise to fight for us, to choose you every day, especially on the hard days, to listen to your silence and hear what others cannot." Alara's heart was so full, it hurt. She raised her hands to sign her response, Frost stepping forward to translate as she had done throughout the ceremony. "I spent 17 years being invisible, believing that safety meant not being seen. You looked at me and saw everything I had hidden, everything I was afraid to be. You did not try to fix me or change me. You just gave me space to become myself." Her signs continued, each gesture precise and meaningful. "I do not promise to speak. I may never find my voice the way others have theirs. But I promise to communicate, to share my thoughts and fears and hopes in whatever way I can, to trust you with my silence and let you trust me with yours." Sage stepped forward again, her voice ringing with ritual power. "By the authority of the moon goddess, I declare this bond witnessed and blessed. What was two is now one. What was separate is now joined. Let no wolf challenge what the goddess has ordained." Kael's hands moved to cup Alara's face, His eyes asked permission. She gave it with a slight nod. He leaned forward and marked her neck, his teeth breaking skin in the ritual claim that would bind them forever. The mate bond, already strong, exploded into full completion, and Alara's soul artist gift responded. Light erupted from her, silver and brilliant, filling the entire hall with radiance. Images began to form in the light, not random images, memories, truths, the essence of everything she had experienced given visible form. She saw her parents, Aldrich and Seraphina, not as corpses, but as they had been in life, laughing, loving, teaching their daughter the ways of the forest. But they were not smiling at her. They were bowing their heads, almost in apology, as if acknowledging that their choices, good and bad, had shaped the person she had become. She saw her grandmother Lena, silver-haired and wise, the secret soul artist who had seen this moment 30 years before it happened. Lena smiled with proud certainty, her faith in her granddaughter finally vindicated. She saw Lyra, Cale's sister, a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle spirit. Lyra looked at her brother with something like forgiveness, something like release, as if his finding happiness finally freed her from the burden of his guilt. She saw Cassius, Victor's brother, a man she had never met, but whose death had shaped so much of her life. He stood straight and proud, his innocence visible in the light of truth. The wrongful stain on his name finally washed clean. She saw herself at 6 years old, huddled in that wardrobe, watching her world end through a crack in the door. And she saw herself now, standing in the light of her own power, no longer hiding, no longer invisible, no longer silent. The images faded slowly, leaving the assembled wolves in stunned, reverent silence. This was soul artist magic at its most profound. Not illusions for battle, but truth made visible. Memory given form. The past acknowledged, so the future could begin. Alara turned to face the pack, her pack now, her home. And then something happened that no one expected, that she herself had not planned. She opened her mouth and spoke. Enough. The word was barely a whisper, rough from 17 years of disuse, hardly loud enough to hear. But in the absolute silence of the hall, it rang like a bell. Cale's eyes went wide. His hand found hers, gripping tight. Alara raised her other hand and signed, Frost translating through tears. Enough hiding, enough silence, enough being invisible. I choose to be seen. I choose to be heard. I choose to matter. She looked at Cale, at Frost, at Sage, at the pack that was watching her with wonder and joy. I cannot promise to speak often. Words do not come easily after so long. But I am no longer silent because I am afraid. I am silent because it is my choice. And when I have something important to say, I will find a way to say it. She raised their joined hands, hers and Kael's, lifting them high for all to see. We are the voice of truth, his voice and my silence, his words and my art. Together, we will build something that honors the past without being trapped by it, something that learns from pain without being defined by it. Her final signs were simple but powerful. I am Alara. I am a soul artist. I am the Luna of the northern White Peaks, and I am finally home. The pack erupted in celebration. Howls rose to the rafters, hundreds of voices raised in joy and welcome. Wolves who had been strangers to her weeks ago pressed forward to offer congratulations, to touch her hands, to tell her she belonged. Cale pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with fierce tenderness. His voice was rough against her ear. You spoke. After everything, you spoke. Alara pulled back enough to sign. I had something important to say. His laugh was wet with emotion. You always do, even in silence, especially in silence. They kissed then, not the formal kiss of ceremony, but the real kiss of two people who had found each other against impossible odds. The mate bond sang between them, complete at last, two broken souls finally made whole. The celebration lasted through the night and into the dawn, but Alara remembered little of it afterward. What she remembered was Cale's hand in hers, Frost's proud nod, Sage's tearful smile. What she remembered was the feeling of being exactly where she was meant to be. 5 years passed like water over smooth stones, reshaping everything they touched. The northern white peaks had changed. Everyone who visited remarked on it, this sense that something fundamental had shifted in the territory's character. It was not just the new buildings or the expanded borders or the increased prosperity, though all of those things were real. It was something deeper, something in the way the wolves carried themselves, the way they spoke to each other, the way they looked at their Alpha and Luna with a respect that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with love. Alara stood in her studio, a beautiful room in the great hall designed specifically for her art. Sunlight streamed through enormous windows, illuminating the paintings and drawings that covered every wall. Some were tactical, plans and maps that had helped resolve conflicts across the northern territories. Some were historical, chronicles of events that needed to be remembered. Some were personal, images of family and pack and home, and some were prophetic, visions that came to her in dreams and demanded to be recorded. The gift of the soul artist was still growing, still revealing new depths. She had learned not to question when the images came. She had learned to trust the gift and let it guide her hands. The door burst open behind her, and 3 small voices shattered her peaceful concentration. "Mama! Mama! Watch!" She turned to see her children running into the room. Eric, 3 years old, with his father's platinum hair and ice-blue eyes. Lisa, his twin sister, with Alara's silver-white hair and quiet intensity. They clutched pieces of charcoal in their small hands, their faces bright with excitement. "Look what I drew." Eric thrust a paper toward her. It showed a somewhat lopsided wolf that was clearly meant to be his father, all angles and fierce expression, the way a child saw strength and protection. Lisa approached more shyly, holding her own drawing close to her chest. When she finally revealed it, Alara felt her breath catch. It was a flower, not a child's crude representation, but a perfect rendering of a moonflower, every petal detailed with impossible precision for a 3-year-old hand. And as Alara watched, the drawing began to glow with soft silver light. The flower lifted from the page. It became real for just a moment, hovering in the air between mother and daughter, fragrant and beautiful and impossible. Then it faded, returning to simple charcoal on paper. Lisa was a soul artist. Alara knelt and pulled both her children into her arms. She signed with one hand while speaking softly, her voice still rough from years of silence but stronger now, more confident. "They are beautiful, both of them. Perfect. When I grow up, I want to be in the silent guard like Aunt Frost," Eric declared, puffing out his small chest. "I will protect everyone." Lisa signed quietly, the way she preferred to communicate. "I want to paint like you, Mama. I want to make things real." Alara kissed both their foreheads. "You can be whatever you want, as long as you are kind, as long as you are brave, as long as you remember that your voice matters, however you choose to use it." Kale appeared in the doorway, their 6-month-old son Asher sleeping peacefully against his broad chest. The Alpha King of the northern White Peaks, reduced to a baby carrier, and looking more content than Alara had ever seen him. "Are they bothering you?" he asked, nodding toward the twins. Alara signed with a smile. "Never. They are perfect." She stood, moving to her mate's side. He wrapped his free arm around her, and they watched their children return to their drawing, their small voices filling the studio with chatter. Through the window, the northern White Peaks spread out before them, prosperous, peaceful, thriving. They had built this together, not just with strategy and strength, though those had played their part, but with truth, with justice, with the willingness to acknowledge past wrongs and work towards something better. Cassius's name had been cleared in formal ceremony, the truth of his innocence proclaimed across all the territories. The conspirators who had orchestrated his frame, those who still lived, had been brought to justice. Victor remained imprisoned, serving a long sentence for his crimes, but he was allowed to write. His memoirs about his brother, about the injustice done to their family, had been published and widely read. It did not redeem him. Nothing could redeem the blood on his hands. but it ensured that Cassius's story would not be forgotten. Draven had served 5 years of hard labor before being released to a kind of supervised freedom. He worked now as a consultant for the Silent Guard, teaching young warriors the tactics he had once used against them. He would never be trusted completely. Some wounds cut too deep for full healing, but he had found a purpose again, a reason to keep living that did not involve destruction. And Alara had built something of her own. The school had been her idea, born from her own experience of feeling voiceless and invisible, a place for children who struggled with traditional communication, children who were mute or deaf or simply found words difficult. Here they learned to express themselves through art, through movement, through whatever medium spoke to them. Some of them had manifested rare gifts when given the freedom to communicate in their own way. 3 soul artists had emerged from the school in the past 2 years, their abilities awakened by the simple act of being seen and valued. The Northern White Peaks had become known throughout the territories as a place where everyone's voice mattered, where being different was not a weakness, but a strength, where the invisible could finally be seen. It was Alara's greatest legacy. Greater than the battles won or the enemies defeated, the knowledge that somewhere, right now, a child who had felt alone and unheard was learning that they had value, that their silence could speak, that their art could change the world. "What are you thinking?" Kael asked, nuzzling her hair. Alara signed, about the scared servant who drew warnings in the snow, about how far she has come. "She became a hero," Kael said, "became a Luna, became the mother of my children and the heart of my territory, became the most important person in my world." Alara signed, "She became visible. That is all she ever really wanted." "You are more than visible," Kael insisted. "You are radiant, you are powerful, you are loved." Alara smiled and signed one word, "Yours." Then she spoke it aloud, her voice soft but clear. "Yours. Always." Kael promised. Forever. Whatever comes. The twins had finished their drawings and were demanding attention, their small voices rising with impatience. Asher was stirring against Kael's chest, his infant whimpers signaling approaching hunger. The studio, which had been peaceful a moment ago, was rapidly filling with the beautiful chaos of family life. Alara would not have changed a single thing. Years later, when she was old and gray and surrounded by grandchildren, she would tell stories about those early days, about the night she watched her parents die and lost her voice to silence, about the week she spent drawing warnings in the snow for a king she had never met, about the 30 white wolves who surrounded her at dawn and the ice-blue eyes of the man who would become her mate. But the story she told most often, the one the children always begged to hear again, was simpler than all of that. It was the story of a woman who had been invisible, who had learned that being overlooked could be a strength, who had discovered that silence did not mean weakness and that art could speak louder than any words. It was the story of finding her voice, not the voice in her throat, though that had come too eventually, but the deeper voice, the one that expressed itself in drawings that became real, in love that became action, in courage that became legend. And when young wolves came to her, feeling lost or voiceless or unseen, she would show them her earliest drawings, the ones from that week when she had risked everything to warn a king she had never met. "I was invisible once," she would tell them, her voice soft but steady. "I was silent and scared and alone. I thought I did not matter because I could not speak. But I was wrong." She would show them her studio, filled with artwork that had changed the territory, paintings that had resolved conflicts, drawings that had designed new buildings, sculptures that had inspired new laws. "Communication is not about sound," she would say. "It is about connection, about truth, about having something to say and finding the courage to say it. Whether that is words or signs or art or simply presence, your voice matters." She would look at them with absolute certainty. "You have important things to say. Find your way to say them, and know that here, in this territory, every voice is heard, even the silent ones, especially the silent ones, because sometimes the quietest voices have the most important messages. Sometimes a drawing in the snow can save a kingdom. Sometimes the invisible ones are actually the most powerful. You just have to be brave enough to be seen. And every time, without fail, the young wolves would leave feeling heard, feeling valued, feeling hopeful. Because Luna Alara, the mute Omega who had drawn warnings in the snow and became a queen, had shown them the truth that changed everything. Every voice matters, even the silent ones, especially the silent ones.